Hello and welcome back to That's What She Said. My name is Mercy. Hope you all are doing good. That's What She Said is now an audio and a video podcast, and we've been featuring some amazing people on all our episodes. And today with us, we have the author of Masala Lab, Mr. Krish Ashok. Welcome to That's What She Said.
Thank you. Pleasure.
So glad to have you here. So I have to give you like a backstory of how I actually discovered you, right? So last year around the same time, I guess, I was talking to this friend of mine who was telling me how he does not believe in refrigerating food. So he was telling me maybe you should also not do that. Always have fresh food. So I got back home and I was actually thinking, because I'm very bad in making smaller quantities. I always end up making bigger quantities and I refrigerate it and I, have it in the next couple of days. So I was thinking maybe I shouldn't do that and have fresh food. And that same week is when I saw your video about how refrigerating food is completely okay.
Yeah.
And that kind of, made me... there's this constant fear, right? Like about food, especially lately, I would say post-COVID.
True.
Right? Like we always think about what to eat, how to consume, how to store. That kind of gave me a different perspective. So thanks to you for putting up that video, and I learned a little from that.
Thank you. I mean, as I always say, I think, when it comes to things like I believe something, right? The safest answer is, facts don't care about your beliefs.
Right. That's so true.
So, yeah, I mean, the evidence and the data actually shows that, well, nothing happens to food in the refrigerator. In fact, in the freezer, nothing happens for months.
Yes,
right?
yes.
So, yeah, and, we waste so much food, right? 30% of all food in a country like India is wasted. I think that's, to embrace the refrigerator more means less wastage. Even if you're thinking about taste and all of that, still not wasting is a good thing.
That is so true, right? So start off with your book. What was the inspiration behind writing the book? Because you're an engineer, like you work at TCS, and I also saw you're into music as well. How did this come up, and how did you think of mixing science and cooking?
No, so as an engineering person, the way for me to understand the world was to break it down into smaller, simpler first principles, right? And science is the best way to understand the world that way, right? And in a sense, actually, it served as a crutch for someone who was not good at memorizing things, right? So my only way of doing well in school was to understand it down to the first principles, right? And so in a sense, if you think about it, software is the same thing. It's breaking large problems down into really small things, right?
Yeah.
And it's the same engineering approach that I took to food. I've been cooking since I was a teenager. So I've always looked at cooking through the lens of the practical things that you learn in school, right? Most people hate science in school because it doesn't have an immediate practical applicability, right?
True.
And practicals in science in school meant those terrible labs where you absolutely learn nothing about that lab says real life, right?
True.
But the kitchen is the greatest physics, chemistry, and biology lab that you will have in your entire life,
right?
And it's actually good for even kids to learn about science in the kitchen, right, rather than in high school laboratories. So for me, looking at cooking is basically chemical engineering, right? Except it's done by our mothers and grandmothers who have practical knowledge, if not the theoretical knowledge of using the language of science. And I saw that nobody had written a book about the science of Indian cooking. Everybody had written about the art and the history and all the rest of that stuff. But so I said, okay, maybe this was the right time, and it was the pandemic when apparently everybody suddenly wanted to know how to cook and how to eat healthy and all of that, and so it just ended up being at the right place at the right time.
Right. When did you first start cooking? What was your first time in the kitchen?
So I think I was a teenager with 3 brothers. I'm the eldest, so my mom trusted the son who's least likely to cause an LPG explosion, and my mother sort of compromised on her career, right, in terms of not taking a job or not taking a promotion that would have meant that she had to travel. She worked in a bank, right? So that, there were 3 of us, and my father had a traveling job as well, right? So the moment I became 13 or 14, and my father said, okay, this guy probably won't burn the house down, so maybe time for my mom to take that promotion, so that's fine. Okay, between me and my father, we'll manage, cooking for the rest of the house. And that's how it started. And then I lived in the US for about 7 to 8 years.
Okay.
And so you obviously
have to,
So my roommates said, we'll wash the dishes you do the cooking, right? So I
Right.
said, yeah, that sounds more interesting than washing dishes, to be honest. So,
Okay.
so that's when I started experimenting and writing things down and trying to understand various, regional cuisines in India.
Okay.
And at the same time, why Indian food works differently from Western food, right? We make fun of Western food, but truth be told, I think the typical Western meal is a lot more efficient, time efficient, and effort efficient for the person in the kitchen.
Right.
Indian food is just a whole lot of back-breaking hard labor, right?
True.
We love it, we cherish it,
Yeah.
but it comes at great cost,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
particularly for women. So,
Yeah.
so in that sense, I think that's when it also struck me that I have to think about shortcuts and really prioritize convenience. And that has been a theme for Masala Lab and all the stuff that I do. Much to a lot of people's annoyance, apparently, because you're supposed to slave in the kitchen to make healthy food. But, truth be told, it doesn't really matter. Convenience actually makes it healthy because it's more sustainable.
So true. Like, yeah, I was actually thinking while you were talking, right? My mom, whenever there's like a guest coming over, she makes almost around 20 to 25 varieties of food. And I still keep thinking, how does she do that?
Yes.
Now, if you tell me to make even like a main course and a starter, I struggle a lot. So it's not easy at all, it's really difficult. So let's move on to, of course, we have to talk about the constant fear around food, right?
Yes.
Especially
Yeah.
after COVID, we know too much about food.
Yeah.
How we should consume it, how we should store it, what's the right amount of food to be had.
Yeah.
Since there's a lot of fear that's going on, how do you think we should get over the fear of food?
I think for starters, I don't think we know too much about food. I think we actually know less. Let's not confuse too much content and actual knowledge.
Right.
There's a lot of content about food.
Yes.
Most of it is actually just silly, out of context fear mongering. And it's out of context, silly fear mongering because that's the easiest way to grow an audience.
True.
Right? Because actual good advice about food or health won't last more than 90 seconds. I mean, you can't really make much content out of it,
Yeah.
right? Because basic advice is eat whatever you want, get your macros right, do a lot of exercise, eat more protein. Is just about it. And all the rest of it is complete nonsense, right? It's content for content's sake. So, in a sense, what has actually happened as a result of social media is people just simply over consuming content rather than knowledge, right? I usually tell people, go enjoy your food eat food instead of eating social media, right?
Yes.
Social media is probably eating your brain.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I think because we now don't actually consume long form, we consume stuff in 30 seconds and 60 seconds and 90 seconds. You can't really say something with nuance. You can only say microwave causes cancer, turmeric is a superfood, maida will stick to your gut. The same old, take any new thing, air fryer will cause cancer, right? Anything that's convenient will cause cancer apparently, right? So I think it is, people have completely lost context of the fact that food is something that you eat during the entire day and your entire week and your entire life. Single meals, single ingredients don't matter.
Right.
I mean, if you're eating snacks all day, that's bad, right? But if you're eating an overall healthy diet and then maybe having like instant noodles with vegetables and egg, that's not a bad thing.
Right.
But if you go to social media, but no, instant noodles is filled with maida, it's filled with palm oil, it's filled with that, so therefore it is bad. So that's, I think, a very silly way of looking at food.
Right. That's so true, right? Like, I feel after COVID, especially, I feel I'm not able to eat anything with like full satisfaction. Like, anything I eat, I start thinking, is this okay? Like read your labels, all of that is good.
Yeah.
But then I feel now it's become too much that we are not able to enjoy a simple meal that I used to do very well before COVID. So,
Don't read the label. Because I think it's sometimes, on the one hand, right, it's good to know what you're eating.
Right.
Fair enough, right? But actually beyond a point, it's like if your apple came with a label, it would have like 400 ingredients, but it doesn't, right? True. It has the same chemicals that a processed food does, right? But we look at processed food in all that detail because of the fact that in some cases, if it's ultra processed, it doesn't have fiber, it has way too much salt, it has way too much sugar in proportions that you don't find in natural foods like an apple or a banana, right?
Right.
but people take it to ridiculous levels.
Correct.
Right? There's this famous sort of meme where there's a list of these molecules like amyl acetate, isoamyl acetate, this big list of as a nutrition label, and ask, would you eat this? Right? And people are like, I will never eat it. The answer is that's actually a banana.
Oh my God.
Right? Banana has some 40 of these amyl acetate, isoamyl acetate. These are the ones that give banana its aroma, right? That quintessential banana flavor, right? And of course, synthetic banana flavor will often take a small set of those things to make like a synthetic vanilla or a synthetic banana flavor, right? Now, I think to some degree, if you are broadly eating healthy, if you are exercising, don't waste your time worrying about single ingredients. Right? So that's why I'm saying, in that context, don't read the label.
Right.
Eat less of it. It's easier.
Just for your peace.
Yeah, just eat less of it if it comes out of a packet and you're fine.
Yeah.
You don't have to read the label.
Right. What, according to you, would you say, these are bad eating habits? Like, let's say, eating right before bedtime is not good, right? So like that, if you can say some bad eating habits, then that people shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
What would you say?
As a general rule, I mean, if you travel the world and see how people eat around the world, forget around the world. If you travel around India, there are just so many variations of how people eat, right? And it's incredible how you can be insanely healthy on any diet, right? Inuits in Canada, they don't eat any plants. They only eat whale and seal. That's all they eat.
Wow,
it's a pure carnivore diet because nothing else is available. It's in the Arctic Circle, right? They are absolutely healthy. In fact, they are more healthy than average people. And in fact, when they start eating, burgers and French fries and pizzas, they have really bad problems, right? But so you can be healthy on that diet too. But you can also be really, really unhealthy on any kind of diet, right? We think our home cooked food is some of the best and most healthiest in the world, and yet we are the diabetes capital of the world, right? People want to blame ultra processed food. The funny thing is that the diabetes rate in people who are eating only home cooked meals, all our uncles and aunties with diabetes, they're not eating processed food, they're not eating ultra processed food, they're still getting diabetes, right? So in some sense, I think we're missing the point about the deeper issues here. One is that, really speaking, if your diet is just significantly higher in carbohydrates, particularly refined carbohydrates, like rice, like wheat, like rava, like whatever, right? And not enough on protein, right? Which means that you as a South Asian are definitely going to be susceptible to pre-diabetes and type 2 diabetes, right? So this therefore means that you do have to add more vegetables and protein to your diet. Vegetables are not a problem. I think Indians eat a lot more vegetables than Westerners do. But we simply do not eat enough protein. Even people who eat meat do not eat enough protein, right? People forget that you have to eat, if you're 80 kgs by weight, you have to eat 80 grams of protein. That's not easy on an Indian diet. Because the protein is not the star of the meal, it's the side. Right? In the West, the protein is the star of the meal, right? The protein is in the center, and then, the mashed potato and the bread is on the side. Here, it's the mountain of rice that's at the center, and then all the other things on the side, right? So I think people need to practically think about how to add more protein. And I think then broadly following the circadian rhythm, which is that your insulin sensitivity kind of decreases. Insulin resistance goes up during the day, right? And kind of at sunset, right? And it starts increasing.
It spikes,
right? It spikes. So you want to eat as little carbohydrates as possible after sunset. To the practical level, I mean, we're Indian. So of course we have to eat our biryani and rice after that. But portion sizes actually might help, or maybe adding, I often tell people, consider eating the biryani piece first. Because that will signal satiety, that will reduce the amount of rice you will eventually end up eating. Right? And things like that, right? And desserts, try and eat them at lunch, right? Rather than at dinner, right? Again, those are high sugar things, right? So in that sense, because what that does is that if you go to bed with your blood sugar still high, that basically spoils your sleep. Right? I mean, you'll still sleep, but it's not high quality sleep. And that then has all these other effects, right? So in a sense that the weird thing is that on social media, people ignore some of these basic things. The fact that sleep is disproportionately important for your long-term health, preventing cardiovascular disease and diabetes and everything else. People ignore that. And then people ignore things like the portion sizes that you eat, and instead focus on whether this biryani was made in ghee or palm oil. It makes no difference, right? It's the portion sizes that matter. And when do you eat it, right? I mean, are you eating a giant amount late at dinner, or are you eating it earlier in the day? Are you eating it, less frequently? Are you eating more protein? So that I think is I would just say these are the simple things, right? Okay. So if someone had to, that's why I said, if you had to sort of make content about food, this is all. I mean, you can do it in like 3 reels and you're done, right?
Yes.
But yeah, then you can't be an influencer, right? I mean, in a weird sense, I end up having to debunk stuff because so much nonsense exists,
Of
right?
course, yes.
If that didn't exist, I wouldn't be necessary as well, right? I mean, you could just say there's only 3 reels. This is all you need to do.
Yeah, but thanks to you, you're doing that. Like the fear among people, I feel, is coming down, because for me, every time I watch a food reel, and I think I started following you a year ago. Every time I saw your videos, I'm like, okay, this is okay. This is also okay. It's fine to do it. So that kind of makes people who are watching, make them feel better.
It's really funny because, see, fear, anxiety, all of that is associated with the cortisol spiking in your blood, right? It's a stress hormone.
Right.
And that, keeping your cortisol levels high, that by itself does long-term damage, right? So I'm not really certain. Just go ahead and eat that biscuit. It's okay. Rather than be continuously afraid. The damage that you're doing by eating that one biscuit with maida and palm oil and all of that is probably less than the damage that the stress and anxiety is doing just because you ate that one biscuit.
That is
right?
so true.
I mean, yeah, it's just that, of course, you must not overdo biscuits. Of course, you must not overdo snacks. But being in a state of stress all through every day because you saw this one reel that suddenly told you that this one thing that has been marketed to you is wrong, and that you're doing this wrong, that this air fryer is giving you cancer, and all of that stuff is just completely silly.
Of course. We were talking about protein, right? Do you think protein powder is a good alternative instead of having meat and,
So it's sort of like, as a general rule, and I think the ICMR guidelines also say the same thing, is that it's better to get your protein from food. Right. As opposed to powders. As much of your protein as possible, right? Now, if you are meat and seafood eating, it's not hard, right? Provided, of course, I mean, there's a privilege thing as well. The protein is the most expensive macronutrient, so it is going to be expensive. But again, I think there are ways. I think just adding 2 eggs to a meal is like 12 grams of protein, right? But at the same time, I think what is also important is that India is at that place where we're growing economically. A lot of people are becoming wealthy. People are being conscious. These products are now available, but we do not have the institutions that keep these things high quality like the way it is in the West, right? We don't have mechanisms by which we can punish manufacturers who don't meet the necessary quality. I think I remember Dr. Abby Phillips's recent study that basically showed that almost every protein powder is sort of adulterated with it has heavy metals, it has all these other fungal toxins and all of that. So obviously that is going to cause a fair amount of anxiety and stress in the Indian public when it comes to trusting the stuff that comes out of a packet. These are transient, temporary issues, right? At the end of the day, if you're eating most of your protein from food, and whatever is the remaining gap, by all means, just buy a trusted brand of protein powder and supplement, right? That actually is the damage from not eating enough protein far outweighs the rare risk that some adulteration in a protein powder is going to affect you seriously. Because again, the amounts involved in those adulterants are so tiny. I think, people sometimes forget the size of the denominator, right? I mean, yeah, you are at far higher risk of not getting enough protein. So to that extent, by all means, just supplement, right? I mean, each scoop is like 25 grams, and it's an easy way to get to whatever you need. And especially if you exercise, it's absolutely important to make sure that you are hitting those goals, right? So I think, yeah, by all means, I think people should embrace these things. Buy a brand that you can trust. But as much as possible, get your protein from food. If you're vegetarian, it is particularly tough because vegetarian sources of protein, even dairy, are like, for example, a paneer is 70% calories is fat. It's not protein. Right? 30% is protein. 70% of the calories are fat. No, because fat is very calorie dense, right? It's 9 calories a gram, right? So paneer does have saturated fat, the same fat in butter or milk, right? So it is. So people have to keep that in mind. So if you're eating paneer, then you have to reduce oil elsewhere, right? And things like that. So, and again, not everyone likes soya, which is great. Soya is actually possibly the best quality plant source protein you can get. But it is also low in leucine, especially if you are somebody who's going to the gym, etc. Leucine is typically high in animal sources, right? But I think vegetarians might have to definitely think about supplementation, especially if they're exercising, right? Or they have to get used to tempeh and tofu.
But that's
and other
expensive,
things. It's not just about expensive, it's also an acquired taste. Not everybody likes it, right? So I guess, by all means, I think if you can, I think you should supplement. And for vegetarians, whey protein is vegetarian, right? I mean, it comes from milk. So it's absolutely fine.
Right. Okay. Do you think social media can create, bad food habits? Like last week, I was just scrolling on Instagram and I saw this lady making amazing motichur laddu. I saw that video and I immediately ordered motichur laddu from Swiggy and I ate it.
Oh, yes.
And then I thought of it, how quickly social media can influence, right?
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that?
The algorithms that decide to show you what you need to see are phenomenally powerful. Because it's AI trained on your browsing behaviors and your preferences, right? So for most people, no contest, right? Unless you have extraordinary willpower, the algorithm will tempt you, right? It will tempt you in one way or another, right? I mean, and it's willpower is not one universal thing, right? I mean, some people have the willpower to say, I will not shop for this clothing or this bag, but they may not be able to resist food. Right?
Correct,
And again, it may also go, it may also have a background in, for example, eating disorders are particularly more common in women because of the way society judges appearances and how you need to eat. So women tend to have more unhealthy of a relationship to food. So you're far more likely to resist buying some expensive, bag or jewelry. But when it comes to a motichur laddu, it might actually be tougher to resist because you probably deprived yourself, of these desserts in the past, right? And it happens more often than not. I'm not saying that's the way it is, but so therefore, what this means is that in general, people have to be conscious that social media sort of works like smoking or alcohol, right? In that once you start having it, it's kind of hard to stop. Right? So while actual scientists don't quite say it's the same as addiction, but they kind of activate the same pathways in your brain, the same dopamine, rush of validation. Every time you post something and you get likes, and every time you see something that you like, and every time you see something that you agree with, all of these is sort of like this continuous dopamine rush of engagement and validation and so on, which means that I think people have to recognize that that device is a bit like that, right? And so, like how you eat desserts, you might have to ration it and sort of, do it once a while and reduce your screen time consciously, keep your phone away, disconnect, right? Sometimes do things like uninstall the app on the phone and force yourself to check on the desktop once in a while. I mean, there are many ways to do this. Go on a complete social media detox for a while, right? I mean, sometimes people find it so difficult to travel. And instead of actually enjoying the beauty of the nature, they see it only through a low resolution screen. Your eyes are far higher resolution than what you see on the screen. But people need to capture and share rather than actually be in the moment and so on. But I think so people have to recognize that this is this insanely addictive psychological equivalent of eating chips, right? You don't know when you'll just keep eating, right? So it's the same thing, right? So when you ask people how long they spend on social media in a day, they'll say, maybe half an hour. They always underestimate by a factor of 8 or 9. You go check your phone, it'll be like 4 or 5 hours. You won't even realize. And then, the fact that the blue light from the screen literally reduces your melatonin levels towards the night. So it actually affects your sleep as well, right? So because it's natural, our bodies are like, sun sets. So it's more orange light. There's less blue light after sunset. So melatonin levels increase. That's how our eyes, right, detect the lack of blue light and then increase, that trigger the signal of, more melatonin, and then you go to sleep, right? Lights, I mean, in general, lights in the house by themselves are affecting our sleep. And now on top of that, we actually have phones, right? Which is where, by the way, it's good to have LED lights in the house that are warm white, temperature-wise, rather than the white ones which have more blue, right?
True.
Because that's closer to daytime. Right? And likewise, I think the phone, nowadays phones have these late evening settings that are more warmer and so on.
Yes, yeah.
Any kind of light
Okay.
is definitely going to affect your sleep.
Right.
So things like, at what point of time do you say no more phones, right?
Yeah.
But then we watch TV, we watch, we're eating, we're actually streaming something,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so on. So it is, I think, it's a set of conscious choices that I guess we have to make. It's not going to be easy. The companies are there to make money, and to show you and sell you stuff.
Yeah. According to you, what are some major misconceptions around food that you see on a daily basis?
The idea of superfoods is just absolutely silly, right? Food is best described as nutrient dense and calorie dense. The best kinds of foods are nutrient dense while not being calorie dense. So that's basically vegetables and so on. Fats, for example, can have a lot of fat soluble vitamins dissolved and all of that. It's great, but they're super calorie dense. Like brown rice or millets and quinoa and those kinds of things are nutrient dense, but they're also calorie dense, right? But polished grains like rava, like maida, like white rice, they are calorie dense but not nutrient dense.
Okay.
So I think in general, you want to mostly eat things that are nutrient dense without being calorie dense, as a broad rule. But you can't just eat vegetables, right? So it's about that kind of balance. And so I think for the most part, I mean, if your plate is basically like 1/4 of that rice and wheat and that stuff, and then 1/4 vegetables, 1/4 protein, right? And the other quarter, depending on what you are, either, like, for example, if you have 1 cup of vegetables, you can actually have like a dal and so on. And if you're vegetarian, maybe it's yogurt and something like that. I think broadly thinking of food in that sense is a much better thing, but it's surprising how people don't look at that at all, right? The second thing is that common misconception is the fact that fresh food is better than leftover food.
Right.
If you're super rich and you always have the option of someone cooking for you, by all means, enjoy fresh food. Nobody's stopping you from that. It's tastier and so on, right? But, right, let's not forget that if your choice is leftover versus ordering from a restaurant, leftovers are way healthier. So far fewer calories. And in many cases, historically, I think, like, for example, food that is left over from yesterday's night and is fermented naturally, like, the rice in payasodam and all that. That actually is fantastically probiotic and healthy as well, right? And so I think first is people have to embrace the fridge, embrace leftovers, embrace fermented foods, and so on. I think the third most common misconception is our Indian traditional food is healthier than everybody else's.
Okay.
Right? It's not, right? Because clearly, I think it was perfect and ideal for the lifestyles that we had 100 years ago, in terms of the physical activity we had, in terms of the number of times we ate, and the fact that we lived in villages and had access to slightly more nutrient-dense vegetables. Back in the day, because the soil quality has degraded. So vegetables now have fewer micronutrients than in the past. And people did not eat 3 meals a day and did not have access to calories outside of their food. Right? Didn't have access to like chips and snacks and other packaged foods in any sense. So in the context of all of that, you really have to rethink what your traditional thali is. I don't think the traditional thali is healthy at all, right? Right down to the balance of the amount of carbohydrates and the amount of protein and all of that. So you do have to rethink the sequence in which you eat. And so I think these are the 3 most common misconceptions.
Okay. Are there any particular ingredients in Indian cuisine that you found to have some fascinating scientific properties?
One of my favorite stories around these ingredients is cloves, actually, right?
Okay.
Cloves have a essential oil called eugenol, right? So eugenol is what gives clove its characteristic smell, right? In fact, when you smell a biryani, I think you're smelling eugenol as one of the things, right? Of course, there are many other, but this is one of the flavor molecules in clove, right? It's a fantastic demonstrator of a couple of things. One is that when you eat it as a clove, it's fine. It's fantastically, it's antioxidant. It's really healthy for you, right? At a slightly higher dose, if you just take the eugenol, right, and then as an oil, right, it's in very small doses. It's a fantastic painkiller, right? Which is why we use it when you have a toothache, right? You take the eugenol from clove and you apply it, and it will numb your teeth. It is also antibacterial, so it also kills the bacteria that are causing cavities and so on. So it's in that sense, yes. Slightly larger dose than that is poison. You'll have to call the ambulance.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Okay.
So, and it's a fascinating, I think, it's a good way to understand spices. Okay. Spices are essentially combinations of flavor molecules that we find flavorful, but plants produce as poisons to kill bacteria, to deter caterpillars and pests and anything else from eating the plant. Right. So, spices are actually poisons. Okay. But in small enough doses, they are fantastically beneficial. Right? At high enough doses, they're all poisons, and that high enough dose is not much.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So by the way, if you go to the US and all that, there is in fact warning on what to do if you're poisoned by eating too much cloves. Okay. Right? So
how much is too much though? Because
it's maybe reasonably like a few grams of clove oil.
Okay, clove
You're
oil.
never going to get poisoned by literally eating the cloves, because you'd have to eat a lot of it, right? And we don't eat it. I mean, it's not very edible. It's very fibrous, right? But the oil itself, you can be poisoned. Okay. But in fact, nutmeg, more than 5 grams, just the spice itself will poison you.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So again, the molecule there is myristicin, and the funny thing is that in small quantities, myristicin makes you high, because it is has the same effect inside your body. It turns into the precursor for MDMA, which is ecstasy, which is the popular drug that gives you high, right? So in that sense, myristicin actually makes you high. Traditionally, it's used along with milk to put babies to sleep. Correct. Right? So it's actually making them high. That's the reason why. Wow. But any more, and you're going to be poisoned. 5 grams is enough, right? Of nutmeg can actually. So that's why don't go too crazy grating nutmeg on a little bit, yes. Okay. And also, by the way, because spices work like perfumes, right? They have these base notes and mid notes and top notes. The top note of nutmeg is very much a quintessential aroma of garam masala and biryani masala. Okay. Right? Okay. But yeah, so which is why you sprinkling biryani masala in the biryani, I think it's fine. Okay. But if you try to take a teaspoon of biryani masala and try to eat it, it'll probably make you sick. Social media, they will say that there'll be so many of these random, stupid detox remedies about adding all these random spices into water and drinking and all of that, right? Yeah. You regularly risk over-consuming that spice beyond what you're supposed to consume on a daily basis, where it's beneficial, right? 3 times a day, people are drinking this turmeric in water, turmeric in milk and all that. It's going to damage your liver. See, remember that...
turmeric milk is supposed to be good, right?
In small...
During when you have infections and stuff.
In moderate quantities. Yeah. Okay. As part of how you use it in your food, it's fine.
Yeah, it's always a pinch of turmeric.
Yes, it's never those unholy amounts. Right, it's not good for you, right? See, the people forget that the only thing that is actually detoxing your body is your liver and kidney. Okay? Right? It's not anything else. Nothing that you eat can detox you. Not eating detoxes you. Okay. Yeah, eating regular fasting, simple food or fasting, drinking water, not eating like heavy ultra processed food. The act of not eating detoxes you, because then your liver does its job. Right. Because everything that you eat is first digested, and before it gets into your blood has to go to the liver. Okay. It's a security guard that then inspects everybody's ID card, checks Aadhaar card sort of stuff, and checks to see, are you good to go? Okay. Right? So that's where alcohol is caught and all these other things are caught. Okay. Right? In fact, like for example, liver beyond a point of, it cannot handle more than a certain amount of alcohol. So then it breaks down, and so then the alcohol gets into your blood. That's how you get drunk. Right? Okay.
So
like that,
every time that happens.
Yeah. So that's why you eventually then end up damaging the liver and so on, right? So your liver has to do this work 24/7, right? And it has to work its hardest for spices, because these are all plant poisons that it has to sit and break down, right? And by the way, so for the most part, your detox system is the reason why when you take medicine, you have to take it 3 times a day and for a week.
Okay.
Because your liver and kidney will get rid of that medicine, the molecule in the medicine, within a few hours, it will remove it from the blood because it's not meant to be there.
Okay.
Right? So that's why you have to keep taking the medicine.
Okay. Okay. But it'll work, yeah.
That's what, no, so that's why I think, you ask me for, if you ask me for 3 common myths, I'll put the one at the top will be the fact that detox is complete nonsense.
Yeah.
You cannot eat something to detox.
Dr. Santosh had come on the podcast. He said the same thing. He said that detox diets don't work.
Absolutely
Yeah.
not, right? It's a contradiction in terms.
Yeah.
You know what is a detox diet? Not eating food.
Yeah.
Or eating very moderate food, normal, easy to digest food.
Right. Right.
That is detox. Because you're not stressing your liver.
Yes. Yes.
That's the point.
Wow. Okay. Awesome. So, what is your favorite meal to cook for yourself?
My favorite meal, so because, the way I grew up in my teenage years in Delhi, so that's usually when you start eating a lot of food and enjoying food, right? Before that, kids tend to be picky about food, right? So for me, comfort food ended up becoming the typical, dal makhani, butter chicken sort of stuff, right? And so for me, dal makhani particularly has sort of become like
You
a
love
comfort
cooking
food.
it as well?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
It's a time-consuming thing. You have to soak for 8 hours.
Yeah.
But now I think, you have these instant pot kind of things, which makes it relatively easy.
Right.
And I like the fact that people think that a really good dal makhani, the makhani means that you have to add a lot of butter. Not necessarily true, right? So if you slow cook the dal generates a mucilage that actually makes it creamy.
Okay.
So it actually refers to that silky texture that the dal itself brings. So you don't have to add tons of butter, although restaurants do.
Okay.
So you can actually make like super healthy dal makhani by just slow cooking it.
Okay. Okay. Do you have any unusual or a secret ingredient that you use for your cooking?
I think it has to be actually 3 things.
Okay.
Is that you want to make any kind of food, particularly snacks, starters, and so on, and you want people to go like, "What did you just add?" Right? Normally, the easiest thing is typically MSG because it really makes it savory, and regardless of all the scaremongering, it's absolutely safe to use.
Really?
Yes, absolutely safe to use. Glutamic acid is an amino acid,
Okay.
right? And anything with glutamates it triggers the umami taste buds on your tongue. That's
Then
all.
why do people say it's not good? Even for pregnant women, they say MSG is not good.
See, glutamate is also a neurotransmitter. At very high levels, it can sort of make you hyperactive and so on. But it has to be insane levels, right? And again, see, when you're pregnant and all that, a lot of diet restrictions, doctors will tell you out of an abundance of caution.
Right.
They do not want, it's like, for example, if you have a thyroid issue, they'll say don't eat soy. If you have some other, for example, blood pressure, don't eat coffee. And so these are just abundance of caution. These don't necessarily mean that if you have that, it will suddenly cause any problems.
Right.
Look, the amount of MSG that we use in most foods is such a tiny amount. You are getting more glutamates from your food naturally
Okay.
that people just forget.
Okay.
Tomatoes are such a delicious ingredient because they're loaded with glutamates.
Okay.
Parmesan cheese, they grate on food.
Right.
It's absolutely delicious because it's very, very high on, in fact, monosodium glutamate, but sodium is also, salt also is there, right? So sodium is also there, glutamate is also there, right? In fact, as the saying goes, right, and it's just simple racism. When white people grate Parmesan on their food, that's, Italian and traditional. When Chinese people put a pinch of MSG, that's considered poison. Right? So we call Parmesan cheese white people MSG. It's the same thing.
Okay.
You are effectively consuming the same amount of
Okay, so you
glutamates
are
and so on.
actually saying MSG is okay to use.
Absolutely fine. In small quantities, it's absolutely fine.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's one thing, but that's not my secret ingredient though, right? Because it's cheating because it directly triggers your umami taste buds and you can get away with making terrible food, but it will really taste good, right? But if you want people to be surprised, you want to use dehydrated onion, garlic, and tomato powder.
Okay.
Right? So that's actually the secret to all snacks. If you eat chips or any of these packet snacks, you will find there dehydrated onion, garlic, and tomato.
Okay.
And they do not taste anything like regular onion, garlic, or tomato because they are ultra concentrated.
Okay. Okay.
So
But
they
is
add
it safe?
It is absolutely safe.
Okay.
Right? Dehydration is something minus water.
Right.
So it's absolutely fine.
Okay.
Right? So it is just so much more delicious.
Wow, I'm going to try this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially on snacks.
Okay.
People say, it will be so savory. It's just incredible, right? Again, remember, dehydrated tomato powder, not too different from MSG, because again, tomato is very high on glutamates naturally. Yes.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so let's do myth or fact.
Yes.
First is carbs are enemies.
Every cell in the body, every cell in every living life form on the planet uses glucose. So it is really about, again, balance, right? The reason they're called macronutrients is you need all three. If you're imbalanced in that you eat too many carbohydrates and not enough protein, that's an imbalance, this thing. Carbs are enemy is such a silly way to go about it because it's what makes food delicious. You can't enjoy food. I mean, you can't stuff yourself with just protein because it'll just, really just stuff you, right? And fat is just way too calorie dense. You need all three, right? Fat makes food delicious. Carbs make food comforting.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah, true.
And so in that sense, I think, and protein helps build your body, right? I mean, yeah. So it's at the end of the day, I think you need all three. I think it's just silly. Yeah.
Of course. Gluten-free is healthier.
No, absolutely not. Unless you have celiac disease or gluten sensitivities, which is about maybe 3-4% of the world's population. For everyone else, people forget that gluten is the protein in wheat. That's the one useful thing in wheat, right? In fact, there's a form of vegan protein called seitan, which is just wheat gluten. Gluten is basically a combination of proteins in wheat, gliadin and glutenin, right? For people who are sensitive, who have specific, where it causes, irritable bowels and all of that, by all means, you avoid it. But otherwise, gluten is what makes bread possible. Right? And if you think you do not want to eat any baked good, right, then, your loss. Right? It's some of the most delicious things on the planet. Yeah.
That is so true.
Yes.
Taking a bath right after a meal is not advisable.
See, I think many of these older ideas. Sometimes they are grounded in some form of practicality, but we lose context of how the world has changed in the last 1,000 or 2,000 years, right? See, if you are eating a heavy meal, typically just after that, there's a whole lot of blood in your intestine trying to get all the nutrients, right, except the blood flow wise, right? And the belief is that if you're suddenly taking a bath, right, then all that blood is going to rush too close to your skin, right, because of the fact that the water is either going to be hot or cold, right? That's how blood circulation is, how we adjust temperature, right? I mean, we sweat, for example, to cool down and so on, right? So the belief is that it might sort of make you feel dizzy as a result of that and so on, right? But again, I think 1,000, 2,000 years ago, people a bath meant going to bathe in the river or, going to a well and, putting this sort of, it's not like a shower with this sort of very manageable trickle of water that you finish in like a 30-second or a, 2-minute bath or something. Right. So in that sense, I think, it's, if you don't feel dizzy, I think it's fine.
Okay.
If you feel dizzy, don't do it. Okay. Right? It's as simple as that. There is no long-lasting damage or any risk or anything like that.
Right. Caffeine leads to anxiety.
For some people, yes, it raises your blood pressure and it does keep you alert. Right? It's part of how it keeps you alert, right? So caffeine basically, so your brain uses something called adenosine to detect when you are tired and exhausted, so that you need to sleep or relax and so on, right? And caffeine goes and fits into that adenosine receptor, so it does not allow adenosine to do its job. Okay. So you are fooled into thinking that you are alert. So caffeine basically just postpones the crash rather than, right? So that's what, but eventually you also get used to it, meaning that eventually you have to drink more coffee to get that same level of sharpness and so on, right? The general idea is that it affects people differently. Some people are very sensitive to it and probably should reduce the amount of coffee they drink, right, to 1 cup or 2 cups, right? Drink what works for you. Some people can drink 4 cups and not have a problem at all, right? Some people have trouble sleeping if they drink coffee after 2 to 3 p.m. because it takes 6 hours for caffeine to be flushed out of the system by the liver, right? Same thing, right? So it completely, so the answer is it depends, right? If it makes you jittery, if it makes you, if it affects your sleep, then reduce the amount of coffee you drink.
Okay, to each their own then.
Yeah.
Okay. Rice should be refrigerated in 2 hours, otherwise it becomes toxic.
See, I think people tend to throw around the word toxic without actually quantifying it. We're like 1.5 billion people. We've all been cooking rice. and we didn't have a fridge till very recently, right? To say that somehow everyone was somehow ensuring that all rice was consumed within 2 hours,
Right.
or whether then it was soaked under water and made sure that it is fermented. And so the moment you put it under water, you are preventing those fungal and bacterial aerobic fungi and bacteria that are bad for you, right? You're preventing that when you put it under water. I think the conditions of each house vary, right? Depending on which part of India you are in, whether it's in the tropics or in the north, right? These 1 hour rules are all just completely silly, right? The honest truth is that people eventually work out a practice that works for them, right? I have absolutely, my mother or my grandmother has cooked rice in the morning and we've eaten it in the afternoon and it has not been kept in the fridge, right? So to that end, but there's no way of say, the more time something spends at room temperature, the statistical chance that it is going to get infected by a fungus or bacteria increases. Correct. We've all bought bread, and after 2-3 days, we've seen that fungus come, right? And particularly in bakery bread, which does not have preservatives, right? So we kind of know that, right? And we appropriately adjust, we eat it, and sometimes we'll just cut out that part. Technically speaking, it is not safe. But to some degree, we all have digestive systems that can deal with some amount of this, right? So don't overthink these things. Don't say, oh, 2 hours is an absolute, it's not like an expiry date, right? Do what works for you. As a general rule, refrigerate as soon as you possibly can, as soon as you think it's practical. That's all I would say.
Okay, all right. Veil kalathula, they say you should have buttermilk instead of curd. Curd it's heat idum
so that's one more nonsense concept, is this heat cold business, right? So food doesn't actually change your body temperature in any way, okay? But if you ask these experts, they will say no, it's not about heat, it's not about temperature, it's some energy and agni and all of that terms they will say. But the problem is that it's a very simple thing. Always ask people, if they say this increases heat, right? Then if I say, can I measure it, right? So if you say, since you say heat, I will say, okay, Celsius, can I measure it with the thermometer? They say, no, it's not that heat, it is energy. I said, energy also we can measure, no? Right? There's a unit of, there's calories, right? You can measure that. No, this is Agni. See, the problem is that if it cannot be measured, then I don't have to accept it.
Yeah,
right?
True.
Then there is no way of proving that you're right. See, there's a famous thought experiment by Carl Sagan, who basically said that, imagine somebody tells you that there is a dragon in the room, right? And you look around and they say, I can't see a dragon. And he says, oh no, it's an invisible dragon, right? It has some force field, it's invisible. Then you're like, okay, it might be invisible, but I can bring an infrared camera because any living thing has to generate body heat. So I should be able to see the infrared camera. He said, no, this is a dragon that does not generate infrared also, right? And then, well, you can say, well, I can shine some kind of light. I should be able to see some sort of a shadow in some frequency. They said, no, this is a invisible dragon that does not cause a shadow also, right? So basically at one point, an invisible, non-heat generating, levitating dragon is the same as a non-existent dragon.
Right.
You can't prove it one way or another, right?
That's true.
So you can't prove me. So you can't prove that it exists. If you can't prove that it exists, then I don't have to take you seriously. So it's the same thing with body heat and all of that, right? But to be fair to people in the past, they probably looked at other effects that food might have on you, right? Like for example, mangoes have this, raw mangoes have this white sticky substance that's stuck to them that comes from the tree, right? And it has this irritant molecule called urushiol, right? And that molecule, it's also present in cashew, which is why it's so hard to eat that cashew apple. It's delicious, but it really causes that mouth ulcer and so on. Urushiol causes contact dermatitis, right? So if it touches your skin, you will get things that look like acne. Okay. So that's why they say mango is sooted, it is causing that acne and all of that. It's more often than not, it's probably that, right? It's probably that urushiol. If you wash, that's why they say soak the mango, wash the mango well. That'll remove that urushiol for the most part, and then it's not going. And again, if you don't eat the skin of the mango, you're not going to have this problem at all. Most of the urushiol is on the surface, right? So people sometimes look at that, but they may not have known this. This only we know now with 20th century technology and all. No? But so they might say, so the knowledge might be, the practical wisdom might be right, but the reasons are often wrong.
Right.
Same thing about, right? So yogurt is very high on fat, right? And again, sometimes people feel very heavy after you eat things that are fat because it's more satiety inducing, right? And in summer you're sweating, you don't want to eat like sort of heavy food, right? Because you'll sweat more and so on. So buttermilk is lighter because you've removed all the fat and you're just left with the whey. So it's much lighter, right? And it's, so people then use hot and cold as proxies for these kinds of things, right? So for example, funny thing is that if you eat a lot of protein, beyond a certain amount, you will visibly start sweating because digestion of protein generates heat.
Okay. Okay.
So your body then sweats to cool you down.
Okay.
So the funny thing is food does not change your body temperature because your body is constantly adjusting.
Right.
See, the moment your body temperature goes in and above or below that 37 mark, we call it a fever or something that's dangerous, right? So people will say silly things like this is alkaline, it will change the pH of your body. No, anything that can change the pH of your body will kill you. Right? Your pH has to be, your blood pH has to be maintained in such a tiny range for all your body systems to function. Right? Okay. Same thing with temperature. Right? If your temperature goes to 99, you are completely down. Right? I mean, it's fever.
Yeah,
right?
True. Wow, that's nice. Last one before we move to the word.
Yes.
Cold press cooking oils is the best option.
No, so best cooking oil is whatever you can afford. Right? Honestly, it does not matter, right? Because again, it's a classic denominator problem that cold press oils may contain slightly more antioxidants and polyphenols and those beneficial molecules that are lost if you refine the oil, right? So the act of refining is basically removing anything other than fat. Okay. Cold press oil is fat plus some of these beneficial molecules. Okay. Indian cooking, it's not like we pour that oil on a salad. Right. We are heating that oil to death. All your beneficial molecules are destroyed the moment you heat that oil to any level of temperature, right? So you're just paying extra money and then wasting it the moment you heat it, right? So therefore, but people sometimes like the flavor. By all means, use it, right? So if you're deep frying, I would say use refined oil. But if you're using light sauteing and like on salads and all that, by all means go for cold press, right? And the other thing is that the amount of fat in your diet is a 1,000 times more important factor than what fat.
Correct.
Right?
Right.
So if you are consuming fats in moderation, then it doesn't matter what fat you eat. Okay. If you are consuming way too much fat, then the fat will do damage whether it's olive oil or palm oil. Right? So then you're just wasting your time trying to feel good by paying a lot of extra money for very tiny extra benefits. Correct. Yes, monounsaturated fats like olive or mustard oil, largely monounsaturated fats. Studies have shown that they're broadly slightly better for heart health than saturated fats. Right? And oils that are very high on polyunsaturated that can end up upsetting the ratio of omega-3 to omega-6, etc., can also be slightly bad for you and so on, right? But all of this is only true if your diet is heavy on fat. Okay. If you're eating fats in moderation, none of this is an issue. Right? So just buy whatever oil you can afford. Okay. If you don't want to overthink it, just buy some refined oil and use it in moderation. Okay. If you believe you want to maximize flavor, that etc., use whatever oil for the dish that you are making. Right. You're making a Bengali dish, use mustard oil. Right? If you're making a Punjabi dish, use ghee. Right? And so on. Right. If you're doing deep frying, use refined oil, and if you're using light day-to-day cooking, use cold press oil if you can afford it. Okay. You're not missing much.
Okay, awesome. With that, I think we've come to an end. And before we leave, can you give us a word of the day?
I know. I think it's something that I kept probably repeating many, so I'll probably use that word, right?
Okay, yeah, no problem.
The word is dosage.
Dosage.
Right? Okay. And it comes from the expression that the dose makes the poison, right? Poison does not make the poison. It's the amount of poison that you eat that makes it a poison. Right? Like spices, small amounts, super beneficial. Large amounts, poison. Right? And by the way, this is true even for water. You can drink a certain amount of water at beyond a point, it is poison. Correct, right? Yeah. Salt, beyond a point, it is poison. So the dosage. So if you understand this concept, you can ignore 99% of social media content and just swipe past and not feel anxious.
Okay.
Moment somebody is pointing to some item on a label, sodium benzoate, oh, this thing, INS 300, INS 450, this color, red color, erythrosine, titanium dioxide, etc., and they're saying this has been linked to cancer, etc., just ask the question, what's the dosage?
Okay.
Right? Because for it to cause cancer, they would have had to pump a rat insane amounts of it.
Right. Right.
One, we are not rats. And two, we're much larger, by the way, and our metabolism is very different. And two, we're never going to consume that proportion of that dosage ever.
True.
Because it's always micrograms, right? So therefore, if you just remember dosage, you can ignore 99% of nonsense on social media.
Okay. That's lovely. Thank you so much. It was so lovely having you here. I think we learned a lot, and I'm sure people who are watching this also would benefit out of it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. And with that, it's time for us to leave. And like I always say, be good and do good.